Bonjour tout le monde. Hi everyone. Mon nom est Catherine Lévesque. Je vais être la modératrice pour aujourd'hui. Alors, et nos excuses pour le délai. Il y a eu quelques petits problèmes techniques. Alors, nous avons avec nous en personne le Premier ministre Justin Trudeau, la ministre de la Famille Karina Gould. We have virtually from Fredericton the Premier of New Brunswick, Blaine Higgs, and the Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development, Dominic Carty, et de Moncton, la ministre des Langues officielles, Ginette Petitpas-Taylor, le ministre des Affaires intergouvernementales, des infrastructures et des collectivités, Dominic Leblanc. Alors, on va commencer avec une allocution de Mme Petitpas-Taylor et ensuite on va passer aux questions. C'est à vous.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à tous et à tous, et j'espère que vous allez bien. Je tiens à saluer le ministre Alain et le député Greg Turner ici à Moncton. Avant de commencer aussi, je voulais prendre un instant pour reconnaître que nous sommes ici à Moncton, fait partie du territoire non cédé du peuple de Mi'kmaq, un territoire qui est couvert par les traités de paix et d'amitié. Et je tiens à vous souhaiter la bienvenue virtuellement de notre belle province du Nouveau-Brunswick. Over the last few years, our government has worked hard on a number of very important issues. The kind of issues that are life-changing to Canadians everywhere in the country. By working with our partners and by working towards a truly progressive and ambitious agenda, we were able to have days with announcements that we will remember because of their lasting impact within our communities. And today is one of those days. Je suis très fière d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui pour participer à une de ces annonces qui aura un impact majeur sur la vie pour les Néo-Brunswickois et les Néo-Brunswickoises. I'm very excited about today's announcement because it represents an important step in building the future of this province. Our government has always recognized that investments in early learning and childcare are not only great for parents, especially mothers, but they're also very important for the overall economy.
Earlier this year, during the election campaign, the message I heard repeatedly at the doorstep was that my constituents wanted a government that could move forward with a plan for a national child care program. So, without further ado, I'll turn it over to the Prime Minister to talk more about that.
Merci, Ministre
Petitpas-Taylor.
C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui avec vous, avec Dominic, le ministre Leblanc, avec la ministre Karina Gould. Je veux aussi souligner le travail exceptionnel de nos députés du Nouveau-Brunswick, Jenica Atwin, Serge Cormier, René Arsenault et Wayne Long. Also, very good to be joined by Premier Blaine Higgs and Minister Carty as well. Parents, and moms especially, across New Brunswick know why affordable childcare matters. La coût de la vie augmente.
The cost of living is increasing on many levels, and we know that a high percentage of costs with young children are those for daycare and childcare. So without these services, there are impossible choices that people must make. Women and mothers who have to choose between their careers and being present for their children. And we need to ensure that we have childcare services that are affordable across the country, and that's exactly what we are doing today in order to change things.
I'm pleased to announce today that we have signed a deal with the government of New Brunswick. By this time next year, child care fees for families across New Brunswick will be cut in half, and within 10 years, the average price for child care in New Brunswick will be $10 a day. Families in places like Moncton and Fredericton will save around $7,500 a year on average. And in addition, we'll be creating around 3,400 brand new spaces. We're going to support workers in early childhood education with a wage grid, and we'll boost the number of trained educators as well. The bottom line is we're going to make life more affordable. We're going to grow the economy by allowing more parents, particularly moms, to rejoin the workforce. And we're going to give kids the best possible start as they begin their schooling. This is part of a commitment we made to grow the economy, to support Canadians. As of today, 9 provinces and 1 territory have now signed on to early learning and childhood education with $10 a day childcare within 10 years. On se rapproche de notre objectif.
We're nearing our goal of creating more than 250,000 new spaces in Canada.
We're ready for $10 a day childcare in every province and territory, because that's a key part of our focus on delivering for the middle class and people working hard to join it. We're going to keep working until every family in Canada has affordable, high-quality early learning and childcare, because that's the right way forward for families, for our economy, and for kids.
I also want to make a comment on COVID-19. We are facing a difficult situation with the arrival of Omicron and a resurgence of cases in many provinces. And therefore, we have to emphasize to people that we must continue to be careful. I know that it's been a very long time that we've been dealing with this, and we must continue to be careful. Obviously, it's very good news that Canada is one of the countries that has the highest level of fully vaccinated people in the world, but we have to continue to be vigilant.
Boosters are now there for people across the country, so please, when it's your turn, get your booster shot, get your third dose. It is going to make a difference in keeping us safe and keeping Canadians out of hospitals into the coming year. It's also time to have our kids get vaccinated. My 7-year-old got vaccinated just a week and a half ago, and it's a huge weight off of our shoulders. We need to make sure that our kids are kept safe. So if your kids are 5 to 11, it's time to get them vaccinated as well. That's the best way we can keep them safe. We can keep all our families safe. Obviously, with the holidays coming up, people are going to have to make choices and decisions around how to keep their loved ones safe. It's important to continue to follow public health guidelines and rules, but know that, as always, the federal government will be there to support you, to see us through it. We made a promise to have people's backs. That's exactly what we will do. And that's yet another example that we're showing today with this historic deal with New Brunswick on early learning and childcare. That's why I'm happy to turn the microphone over to Premier Higgs. À vous, Blaine.
Over to you, Blaine.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Good morning, everyone. This
is an important day for our province. New Brunswick is already a leader in terms of educational childcare, and our government is determined to continue to improve our services in this sector across the province.
That is why we've previously invested more than $70 million annually in childcare, in addition to $20 million provided through our federal partners. These investments include educator wage supports, quality improvement in infant grants, training and subsidies for families. Since 2018, we have worked hard and made increasingly significant investments to improve and grow our early childhood sector. To help with the recruitment and retention of trained educators, we met our commitment of raising the wages of early childhood educators to $19 per hour, 2 years ahead of schedule, under the Early Childhood Educator Wage Support Program. We've supported more than 518 childcare facilities to become designated early learning centers or early learning homes. In fact, 92% of spaces for children aged 5 and under are in designated facilities, and this program is available to any interested licensed facility. Over 92% of childcare centers are designated, and 73% of childcare homes are designated. And we have provided approximately $50 million annually in quality improvement grants to help early learning and childcare facilities that offer services to children under 5, so that they can improve the quality of their indoor and outdoor learning environments. I also want to recognize our childcare sector workers during the difficult situation that the COVID-19 pandemic has created. You have shown dedication and exemplary resolve in taking care of New Brunswick's children. And for that, I cannot thank you enough. Les petites enfants est une période très importante.
Early childhood is a very important period in the life of a child.
Aux familles de New Brunswick
I want to assure the families in New Brunswick have access to quality services for their children that will allow their children to have the necessary tools to be successful.
I have to tell you, our early childhood education system in New Brunswick is an untold success story. We have made huge strides towards improving the quality of education in our province over the last 2 decades. And as a result, we have an early childhood education system that is leading the country. The quality of education and care that New Brunswick's children receive is second to none, and today's announcement is building on the foundation we have laid. That is why, while negotiating the terms of this agreement, we made sure to take the time to fully understand it and any impacts and implications it might have on our early learning childcare sector. And that under this agreement, both for not-for-profit and hybrid sectors would have the opportunity to grow. Nous voulons être certains que
we want to be certain that we have this agreement and that our early childhood sector will be progressive and modern.
With this agreement, families will see on average a 50% reduction in childcare fees for regulated early learning and childcare spaces with the New Brunswick Early Learning Center or home designation by the end of 2022. That means, on average, families could see around $3,000 in savings. This also comes with the goal of reaching an average of cost of $10 per day for childcare by 2025-26. It helps us as we create more high quality and affordable childcare spaces and addresses some of the barriers to providing inclusive and flexible childcare. Cet entente va aider nos familles.
This agreement will help our families that are the most vulnerable by broadening the support that are available through the province and by continuing to offer a model with calculated fees on a sliding scale. This will allow families who need services, these childcare services, to have access to them.
And it allows growth in the number of spaces available by opening 5,700 spaces over 5 years as part of the designation program. L'annonce d'aujourd'hui
Today's announcement is good news for our early child care sector, and I'm very pleased to make it today with Prime Minister Trudeau, Minister Gould, Minister Leblanc, Minister Petitpas-Taylor, and Minister Carty, in order to give you details on our agreement with the federal government.
And I want to emphasize that this 5-year agreement is only the beginning of longer-term investments and partnerships to make sure that New Brunswick families are able to access affordable, quality, and inclusive childcare services. The early learning and childcare sector in New Brunswick plays an important role in our economy and making sure that families are able to fully participate in the workforce by making childcare fees more affordable and accessible. More parents will be able to take advantage of these programs and join or rejoin the workforce. Nous savons que le travail accompli par les travailleurs du secteur de la petite enfance est très important.
Learning and childcare sector is very important, and that's why we're going to continue to work with the people in this sector and with our federal partners in order that these establishments will be able to broaden their scope in their
Together, we will
province.
continue to work to improve our early learning and childcare system for years to come. We will be able to better meet the needs of New Brunswickers and their children, but also create a system that is sustainable, resilient, and successful. By working together with our federal counterparts, we will be able to achieve our long-term goal of providing the best possible learning and care environments for our youngest learners. I want to thank all those involved in an extensive negotiation, but an outcome that is worth talking about and worth recognizing as a success story for our province and for our relationship with our federal partners. I also want to reflect momentarily on the Prime Minister's comments about COVID and certainly the concerns about the Omicron virus and what that can mean. I have commented often about the support the federal government had for all provinces throughout the pandemic in the past 2 years. And I'm encouraged by the continued support that may very well be necessary as we go through this, another wave of the virus. We're all tired of COVID, without any doubt, but we must continue to work together on a common goal, and that is to develop a life that's worth living here in all our provinces and manage this virus. And I thank the federal government and all of my colleagues for the support in doing so. At this point, I would like to introduce our next speaker, the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development of Canada, Karina Gould. Merci.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Premier. Good morning, everyone. I would like to first acknowledge that I am joining you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. It really is a pleasure to be here today alongside the Prime Minister, my colleagues, Ministers Petitpas-Taylor and LeBlanc, and Premier Higgs and Education Minister Dominic Carty for the significant announcement on early learning and childcare for New Brunswick. Today, New Brunswick joins 9 other provinces and territories as we build our Canada-wide early learning and childcare system, working towards $10 a day childcare for children right across the country. Childcare is a vital part of our social infrastructure, and to truly build a stronger, more inclusive Canada, all Canadians must have access to affordable childcare. That is why we are here today. Je suis fière de faire partie de l'équipe.
I'm proud to be part of the team that has taken concrete steps to help Canadian families. Today's agreement with the provinces will change the deal for children and families. This will give realistic options to parents, create jobs, and help grow our economy.
Families will see a 50% fee reduction in average fees for licensed childcare spaces by the end of 2022, with fees for licensed childcare reaching $10 per day on average within the next 5 years. In comparison, the current daily average childcare fee in New Brunswick is over $35 a day. Growing quality spaces is also a critical part of the system of building a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system. And this agreement will see the creation of 3,400 new licensed childcare spaces over the next 5 years, including an additional 500 by March of 2023. This agreement also recognizes the importance of Indigenous early learning and childcare and the need for the Government of New Brunswick to work in collaboration with Indigenous partners. Je sais que cette entente est ambitieuse.
I know that this agreement is ambitious, but that is exactly why we are here, to be ambitious for Canadian families. Together, we will be able to achieve our goals for New Brunswick.
The valuable work of early childhood educators is key to the success of a high-quality early learning and childcare system. ECEs are at the heart of this system. Our agreement today includes significant investments to attract, retain, and support our wonderful early childhood educators in New Brunswick. Je veux également remercier
I also want to thank all those who participated in today's announcement, in particular the Minister of Education, Dominic Carty, with whom I worked very closely over the last few weeks in order to achieve this agreement.
Across New Brunswick will have the best possible start in life, no matter where they live, and I am incredibly proud to be part of this historic agreement. With that, I would like to turn it over to Minister Carty to say a few words. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Bonjour à tous et tous et merci de
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today.
Canada, Premier ministre Nouveau-Brunswick, le ministre fédéral,
From
et
New
je
Brunswick, I want to thank the federal ministers, and I want to repeat my enormous appreciation for Minister Gould and for all of the tremendous work she's done in the last few weeks to bring us to the point that we are at today by making this agreement real today. It's always a pleasure to work with her and to be part of the signing of this historic agreement.
It is great to finally have some good news to share in the middle of a time that has been all too often punctuated by moments of anxiety and darkness in recent months. This is an unmitigated good news story for the kids of New Brunswick and for Canadians. We spent here in New Brunswick years building and expanding an early learning and childcare sector that provides families with access to quality, affordable, and inclusive early childhood education. This program, this accord, is going to build on those successes. We had a program that offers regulation and supports for centers so that New Brunswick's early learning centers and homes meet ever higher standings in terms of learning, in terms of health and safety. Nous voulons que chaque enfant dans la province soit doté des bons outils dès le départ.
The right tools right from the outset. We believe in the creation of
flexibles et adaptés aux besoins individuels des jeunes apprenants.
Programs for young learners. This agreement will contribute to eliminating the obstacles. It will be inclusive and flexible for vulnerable children, for children who are disabled and from various communities.
But to do this, we need to make sure we're able to recruit and retain trained early childhood educators so they can provide learners with the building blocks they need to be successful throughout their time in school and beyond. So that's why, in addition to lowering the average childcare fees for families, this agreement supports the implementation of a wage grid for educators in our designated facilities. And I look forward to sharing details on that with operators and educators in the days and weeks to come. Le gouvernement provincial soutiendra également les exploitants d'établissements par entreprise des programmes d'amélioration des salaires afin de tenir compte des récentes augmentations des salaires minimums. Nous fournirons bientôt plus de détails à ce sujet aux exploitants et éducateurs.
On this
Nous
to
allons
them
travailler en
later. We will
collaboration
work
avec les
in
exploitants et les
collaboration
éducatrices de tout le
with the
secteur
operators
afin d'examiner
and the
nos
whole
stratégies de
sector
recrutement et de
in
rétention,
order to
de créer
improve our
davantage de
recruitment and
possibilités
retention strategy
d'apprentissage et
so
de
that there will be
perfectionnement
new learning
professionnel
abilities and
et
professional
d'attirer
development
davantage
abilities,
d'éducatrices et
as well
d'éducateurs
as
internationaux
training
au
new
Nouveau-Brunswick.
people to work
By
in this
providing
field in New
opportunities
Brunswick.
for early childhood educators to continue learning and to engage in professional development, we are supporting high-quality learning environments for our children when they are in the most crucial stages of development. We know that if we were reinventing the education system today, it would start with early childhood education, and that's why in New Brunswick, early childhood education is a growing part of our system. We recognize the needs and we recognize the importance of moving ahead on this file. Nous avons pris notre temps
We
pour
took
bien
our
examiner
time
cette entente
to
quand nous
closely
voulions nous assurer
examine
que
this
nos garderies
agreement
éducatives
because we
existantes,
wanted to
qui sont en grande
ensure that
partie
our
de petites
existing
entreprises
daycare
appartenant à des
centers
femmes entrepreneurs,
are usually
soient
small
bien
ones
soutenues
with
par le cadre établi
private
dans
owners
cet accord.
will be able to have
Je
their
peux
place
maintenant
within this
affirmer
agreement.
avec
And I can
confiance que
state
nous
with
serons en
confidence
mesure
now
de
that we
soutenir les
will be able
entreprises
to
hybrides
support
et sans
hybrid
but
businesses
non lucratives de notre province.
and nonprofits
Et nous ne
within our
pourrons pas y
province.
arriver
And we
sans le
will
soutien et
would
l'engagement
not be able to
permanent
do
des
that
familles,
without the
des
support
éducatrices, des exploitantes et
of
des autres
all of the
parties prenantes
operators
du
and
réseau
all of the
du domaine d'éducation de la
stakeholders
petite
in this
enfance.
network of early
We'll be
child care.
conducting extensive consultations next year across the early learning sector to make sure stakeholders have the opportunity to help us build on the framework that we've presented here today. Je tiens à remercier
And I want to thank our federal partner for joining us here today and for committing to this project with us and in order to offer New Brunswickers better access to inclusive and high-quality childcare. And finally, I'd like to take a moment to emphasize the incredibly precious role that our ECEs play in the lives of our youngest learners. We cannot forget that they have been there for us throughout the entire pandemic. Sometimes they're not just ECEs, they're nurses and friends to our children, and they're a source of inspiration, creativity, and comfort. New Brunswick is lucky to be able to count on quality people like you and we will do everything we can to help you. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to introduce Dominic LeBlanc, Honorable Dominic LeBlanc, the MP for Beauséjour and the Minister for Intergovernmental Affairs, Infrastructure, and Communities. An MP for 20 years, Dominic doesn't need an introduction for most of us in New Brunswick. Over to you.
Good morning, and thank you, Dominic, for those kind comments. Prime Minister, Premier Higgs, and colleagues, moi, je suis très content d'être ici
I'm
à
very
Moncton
pleased to be here in Moncton today with my colleague and my friend Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor, but also with the Minister of the New Brunswick government, Mr. Alain, and
Today's
Greg
announcement, as my colleagues have said, will make a great deal of difference for the families of New Brunswick. And I want to salute, as my colleagues have, the real collaboration between the governments of Canada and New Brunswick that brought us to this happy place this morning. The pandemic has created significant challenges for families all across Canada. This is especially true for parents of young children who juggled working full-time while often staying at home with their kids, or dropped out of the labor force altogether to look after their children, and in many cases had to also find temporary alternatives to their regular childcare. Même dans les meilleurs moments,
even
il
at the
s'agit de
best of times,
responsabilités énormes.
these are huge
Sans parler de la
responsibilities,
coordination
without talking about
que tout cela
mentioning
implique.
rather the
Alors
coordination that all of
imaginez-vous
this implies.
ce
So
qu'il en est
imagine what it
en
is
période de pandémie.
during a pandemic.
Alors aujourd'hui, nous
So
sommes
today,
tous ravis
we're all
d'être
delighted
ici,
to be
d'être
here
accompagnés
and
par
to
le Premier
be
ministre
accompanied
Trudeau
by
et
Prime
par le
Minister
Premier
Trudeau
ministre Higgs pour
and
cette
Premier
annonce
Higgs for this
spéciale.
announcement. It's very special.
Thank you again, Prime Minister, for your work and for our colleague Karina's work. And with that, Prime Minister, we turn it over to you for questions from the media. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup à
Thank
tous.
you very
Alors,
much
nous allons
to
procéder à la
all.
période de
We will
questions.
move
Just
on
a
to the
reminder,
question
one
period.
question, one follow-up. We will start with questions in the room. We do have quite a few people, so I'll ask you to limit you to one question, one follow-up, and short questions, short answers, and then we'll turn to the phones. We have a hard stop at 20 minutes for the Prime Minister. We'll start with you, Mike.
Prime Minister Mike Couture with Global National. I wanted to know, with today's apology, what do you hope to accomplish? And what do you say to survivors of military sexual misconduct who still doubt in your government's ability to change the military's deeply ingrained culture?
Well, I think we all recognize that there is still, and will be for a long while, a lot more work to do. Changing the culture in the military is something that can't happen overnight, but it needs to happen as quickly as possible. And the way to do it, every step of the way, is to put survivors at the center of everything we do, to focus on the women and men who serve in our Canadian Armed Forces and make sure we are supporting them. So this apology is an important part of recognizing their experiences, of seeing them and telling them that we will be there for them going forward, but also that we recognize the mistakes of the past that weren't worthy of the women and men who chose to serve their country and their armed forces.
So if this apology is so important, why aren't you the one delivering it?
I think there have been many discussions around the right way to move forward, and I am very pleased that the Chief of Defence Staff and the Minister are the ones making this apology. But as you've seen, this is an issue that matters deeply to me, on which this entire government has been engaged and will continue to focus.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau, Christian Noël de Radio-Canada.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. To follow up on what my colleague's asking, in fact, you have the opportunity right now. Do you feel the need as Prime Minister to apologize to the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces? Answer. I think that over the last few months and years, as I speak to you here from this room, I have often spoken of what is acceptable in terms of what's happened to the men and women who served in the Canadian Forces, and that this must change. It's clear that this is something that we profoundly regret, but above all, we are committed to changing, and we have a great deal of work ahead of us to do this, to really meet the expectations of the men and women who chose to serve their country and chose to serve in the Canadian Armed Forces, and will continue to do that necessary work today. Today, there is a recognition of the profound regret that we have and the recognition in this country of the terrible mistakes of the past. But we also remain committed to the work that we need to do to put an end to this problematic and sometimes toxic culture in our Canadian Armed Forces, and above all, to improve things in the future. I didn't hear the word excuse in your apology in your comments, and I would like to know if you want to continue and express your personal excuses. But going to today's subject, in Ontario, the costs of childcare are the highest in Canada. Are you prepared to make concessions to the Ford government? Well, I thought I had said that we profoundly regret what has happened, and we apologize to all of the survivors in the Canadian Armed Forces who never should have experienced the things that they did when these people offered their services to our country, and they wanted to offer their service to all Canadians in the forces. Look, today it's a very good thing that we are signing an agreement with the 9th province on early learning and child care. This is something we know will make a huge difference from coast to coast in this country, and we remain optimistic that families in Ontario will also have their chance to have a reduction of 50% in their costs for childcare in the future. We will continue to be there with Ontario. We have demonstrated since the outset that we are open, we are flexible. New Brunswick has a different system. It's slightly different from every other province in the country, and we were able to work with them in order to find the right formula that would bring us to that $10 a day fee, so half a 50% reduction by next year. And we're able to create new spaces. That's what we'll do with Ontario as well. I'm very optimistic that we'll be successful.
Adam Heuris, the New Brunswick Telegraph-Journal. My question is for the Prime Minister and also Premier Higgs. Representatives of the childcare sector in New Brunswick say the sector is in crisis. They say early childhood education wages are too low. They rather work in the public sector school system and get paid more. The entire point of affordable childcare is to see more kids go so parents can work. So aren't you worried that this is not going to have the desired outcome?
This agreement today?
Well, I would say exactly just the opposite. That's what's exciting about this this announcement today, as it does indeed carry on from what we had initiated back over the last several years to raise the wage, but we were at 19, allows us to get on up to 23.47 or in that range, and also to continue on with the training and the designations in order to make it even more of a I guess a successful program. So this announcement today with the federal government is very encouraging, and I would like to think that every employee in the childcare sector would see this as an agreement that reflects the value that they bring to early learning and the necessary steps in ensuring that it's a career that is well worth pursuing and developing and enhancing.
The goal of these early learning and childcare agreements are to ensure that families have access to high-quality, affordable childcare right across the country. And that's what we set out in the various elements that were mandatory when we would sign agreements with provinces and territories right across the country. The first is to make sure that they're affordable. That is to cut affordability, to increase affordability by cutting fees in half by the end of next year, which is going to happen in New Brunswick. To move towards a $10 a day childcare average cost across the province within 5 years, which is going to happen. But also to move forward on creating more spaces. We saw, even in places that have excellent childcare systems already, like Quebec, there is a need for tens of thousands of new spaces, and this money is going to allow for that. Here, we're talking about 3,400 brand new spaces, and that will help alleviate the challenges. But the final and just as important element of these childcare agreements is a wage grid and professional training regime for the early childhood educators to make sure they're properly paid, to make sure they're properly supported, but also to make sure that it is seen and understood to be what it is. That is an extraordinarily valued and important career choice for young women and men in New Brunswick to choose. That is what it takes to create an early learning and childcare system that will be impactful on Canadians in the coming years, but also in the coming decades. That has been our focus, and that is what we've arrived to today with New Brunswick.
Follow-up for the Prime Minister. The Wolastoqey First Nation in New Brunswick has filed a title claim in court seeking title to roughly 60% of New Brunswick, but actual land from a smaller portion of government land, Crown utility land, and in major forestry company land. Prime Minister, I wanted to know what you think the federal government's obligation is, whether you rather see this settled out of court, and whether you share concerns of Premier Higgs, who has warned there's repercussions for New Brunswick as a whole.
Ideally, reconciliation isn't something that happens in the courts. It happens when we sit down nation to nation with Indigenous leadership and communities and try and solve problems that in some cases go back centuries. It's never going to be easy, but I also know that these challenges can be solved by working together in respect and partnership. That is certainly the approach that we have taken on reconciliation, and Ministers Miller and Haidu will continue to engage with this community and others as we look for the right path forward to ensure that Indigenous peoples are full participants in every aspect of Canada's success. There's lots of work to do, but we have made significant progress, and we will continue to work on it.
l'inaudible, la presse canadienne. Je vais commencer par une très courte, en espérant une très
I
courte
have a
réponse.
very
Est-ce que vous
short
avez
question
mis un mécanisme pour
and
assurer
like a short answer.
qu'un
Did you set
pourcentage
up
des
a
nouvelles places au
mechanism to
Nouveau-Brunswick
ensure that a
soient des
percentage
places
of the
en français?
places in New Brunswick will be for
Oui,
francophone
dans
children?
tous les accords qu'on a
Yes,
signés à
in
travers
all
le
of
pays,
the agreements we signed across the country, there is a recognition of linguistic communities, official language minority communities, and initiatives for children who are suffering with disabilities. So we're signing agreements with Indigenous communities. All of these distinctions are reflected in the agreements we're signing. On another subject entirely, since Bill 21 was tabled, which has become the law now 2 years ago, you said Ottawa is dealing with this, it's before the courts, and I won't go farther than that. So I'd like to know why you're comfortable with the fact that your ambassador, Mr. Ray, is talking about ministers and MPs who very clearly have made strong statements in the last few days. Well, I always said very clearly that I'm deeply disagree with Bill 21. I don't find that in a free and open society that someone should lose their job because of their religion. And this is no longer a theoretical issue. There are families, there are communities, there's a community in the Outaouais that is reacting, and they're very concerned. They're very sympathetic because of the teacher, Fatima Anbari, who lost her job because of her religion. Quebecers are huge defenders of freedom of expression, gender equality, freedom of conscience. We're people who are always there to defend our rights. And I know that there are many Quebecers who are very concerned by the fact that in a society that claims to be free and open, that someone can lose their job because of their religion. So within our process, a province has passed legislation, and the citizens of that province are defending their right before the court. And that is exactly as it should function, but as I have said very often, we have not done away with the possibility of intervening as the federal government at some point in time.
Hi, Mr. Trudeau, Mackenzie Gray with CTV News. On Friday, Dr. Tam said that if Omicron takes over in Canada, we could have 12,000 cases a day by January. And on the weekend, Boris Johnson in the UK said that a tidal wave is headed for that country. Considering the Omicron news that we've seen out of Ontario, is it just a matter of time until that tidal wave takes over Canada too?
We are obviously very concerned with the numbers that Dr. Tam shared on Friday. But I think Canadians are also very aware that we have done many things to keep ourselves safe, and we just need to continue them. First of all, getting vaccinated, making sure that everyone is double vaccinated is really important. As we make boosters available, certain age ranges, please book your appointment for a booster. Let's make sure our kids between 5 and 11 continue to progress in vaccination. My son got, my 7-year-old got vaccinated about a week and a half ago. I know lots of parents who are doing exactly that as well. At the same time, as we look at Christmas and the holidays coming, people need to be listening to public health advice and making decisions that minimize their risks. I think we've all learned an awful lot about how to keep ourselves and our loved ones safe, and I know Canadians are going to be thoughtful about everything we can do to keep the numbers down, because nobody wants to have another winter in which our hospitals and our frontline health workers are getting close to overwhelmed.
On boosters, the U.S. has been handing out boosters to anyone who wants one 18 and up since mid-November. The UK just moved up the timeline, but today here in Ontario, just as an example, people 15 up were just starting to allow to be booking their boosters. Are you satisfied with the pace the provinces are handing out boosters at this point in time?
Our responsibility as a federal government has been to make sure that there is a supply of boosters for all Canadians. We have done that. There are sufficient vaccine doses for Canadians to get boosters. the logistics of rolling out those boosters to the priority age groups and eventually to everyone is being handled by the provinces, and we will continue to be there to support them as they do this important work in keeping Canadians safe.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Marie Vastel de Bois.
Marie Vastel. I'd like to come back to Bill 21 as well. Premier Legault last Friday said that this teacher from the Chelsea school should never have been hired because Bill 21 was already law when she was hired, that she should never have been hired in the first place. So I'd like to hear you out on that. What do you think of that explanation? What's your reaction? Well, I think of the parents of those grade 3 children in Chelsea who have to explain to their children why a teacher that they loved, who was doing a great job, everyone agrees on that she was doing her job very well, lost her job because of her religion. I think of these conversations that people within the community have had, people across the province of Quebec are having with their children now, to explain how, in a free and open society, we can let someone go uniquely because of their religion. And in fact, that's why I was always against Bill 21. Question, you say you're against the bill, and you said in response to my colleague earlier that it's no longer theoretical. This is a real case with this teacher in Chelsea. Your caucus spoke out more strongly against Bill 21. So how can you explain that you're waiting to intervene even now? Answer, well, I think that the important thing now is to understand that the province adopted this legislation and Quebecers are in the process of defending their rights through the legal process in the province of Quebec. I think that it's important in the first stages and the work that's being done right now to not give the excuse of a fight between Ottawa and Quebec, but to ensure that it is Quebecers themselves who deeply disagree with the fact that someone can lose their job because of their religion. And not to give the excuse to the Quebec government that this is federal interference, but just to say, no, Quebecers disagree with this principle, that a young woman should be able to lose her job, a teacher who was doing her job very well, simply because of her religion. Obviously, there are many people across the country, but many Quebecers as well, who are asking themselves hard questions that they should be asking themselves. Is this bill justified or not? And as I've said from the outset, I don't think that it's a good thing, either for Quebec or for anyone.
Prime Minister Lee Berthiaume, Canadian Press. Sorry, up here. How you doing? I wanted you to go back to the apology that's scheduled for later on today. I know you were asked earlier in French about your personal feelings about the apology. I was hoping you could talk about that, as well as what you would say to those victims who perhaps looked at your government and were hopeful at the beginning, and now are disenfranchised, are upset, are frustrated, and just just not happy with how things have gone out.
First of all, survivors of sexual assault and sexual misconduct in the military need to be at the center of everything we do going forward, and that is why this apology today is so important and why I fully and wholeheartedly support it and endorse it. We need to remember these are lives of people that were impacted, lives destroyed in some cases by sexual assault, to which, as an institution, the Canadian Armed Forces regularly turned a blind eye. That needs to change. And part of making that change is recognizing the failings and mistakes of the past. That's what the apology is about. But there is so much more to do, and that is why we have engaged General Carignan to lead up a new unit in the armed forces. We've asked Justice Arbour to make recommendations on how to change deeply and permanently the culture in the Canadian Armed Forces so that this culture that all too often has been toxic is not allowed to continue. There is much more work to do, but we have begun the hard work of making sure that our Canadian Armed Forces are worthy of the extraordinary women and men who choose to serve and who all too often get treated in ways that are absolutely unacceptable.
And I wanted to ask about a separate topic. At last month's White House meetings, did Canada propose making Canadian assembled electric vehicles eligible for U.S. tax credits? And if so, were White House officials at all receptive to the idea?
Canada and the United States have been making cars together for over 50 years now. Our supply chains are deeply integrated. The way we do things in the past has been good for Canadians and for Americans alike. And we expect that Canadians and Americans will be able to continue to make cars together for decades and generations to come. That is why we are working very hard with the United States on getting them to understand that this proposed EV rebate for American-built cars only is not good, obviously, for Canada, but also not good for the United States. There are a number of solutions we've put forward. One of them would be to align our incentives in Canada and in the United States to make sure that there was no slippage or no unfair advantages on one side or the other. We are happy to do that. Those are conversations that are ongoing right now. But Canadians need to know that just as we always have, we will always be standing up for Canadian workers.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I understand that we'll have an economic update tomorrow, but in general, has inflation changed your plans or your strategy? Answer. Our strategy from the outset has always been to be there for Canadians with everything that's necessary, for as long as is necessary, as long as this pandemic has not ended, whether it's a challenge of having vaccinations or in the country or giving help to small businesses, whether it's helping families who are facing great challenges because of the pandemic. We have always have done everything necessary. Inflation is piling on another challenge, and it's a big challenge for a great many families who are concerned about the cost of living. And in fact, that is why I'm so happy to be able to announce today for the families in New Brunswick that we will be cutting their child care expenses in half by next year, so that we can have $10 a day daycare in that province within 5 years. That's going to save, on average, $7,500 a year in Moncton or Fredericton. And we'll continue to be there with initiatives on housing, on assistance to families, increases for the Canada Child Benefit tied to the cost of living. We're going to be there to continue to help people. And on the contrary, inflation is emphasizing for us why it's so important to be there for us people. Question, you've talked about Omicron in English and the outbreaks in England and elsewhere. Does Canada feel that we need to formally advise people not to travel in the next few weeks? Well, we're obviously very concerned with the Omicron variant that has arrived, but we can also see that Delta cases are rising in Ontario, Quebec, and elsewhere in the country. Therefore, we remind people to continue to be vigilant and to follow the recommendations and instructions issued by public health authorities and Health Canada. The best thing to do, as always, is to get vaccinated. Canadians are almost at 90% now in terms of vaccination levels, but there remains work to be done with our young people and with the booster shots that are now available. But we also need to follow the directions We have changed the rules for people returning to the country in the coming weeks. We have added different rules to protect people. Canadians have been living for months and months with variants and difficult situations. And what I encourage everyone to do is to watch for what the public health rules are and make their decisions as a result of that, to manage their holidays in such a way as to protect everyone so that we don't find ourselves in a situation in the new year where our hospitals are overflowing once again. We have to continue to be vigilant. We hope to have some nice moments during his Christmas holidays, but we have to continue to be careful because we're still in a pandemic.
That is all the time we have with the Prime Minister and I believe Premier Higgs. The ministers will be staying for a few more minutes. So we'll be at David Thurton and then we'll go to the phone lines. Alors, on va laisser quelques secondes pour le
We'll leave a few minutes for the Prime Minister to leave.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions. I guess this question is for Premier Higgs. Oh, he's leaving. Okay. Okay. Prime Minister left and Premier Higgs left. Okay. All right. So, Minister Gould, I'll just ask you, maybe you could just give us an update on when we might see some other deals with the territories, because I believe there's 2 territories that haven't signed any deals, and also with Ontario.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the question. So first of all, I'm really thrilled that we're here today to announce the agreement with New Brunswick. I've had a great working relationship with Minister Cardy, and so very pleased that we're making today's announcement. I can tell you that we are having very, very positive conversations with the 3 remaining jurisdictions. In fact, with Northwest Territories, very confident that we will be, very shortly able to announce something, so that is really good. With Nunavut moving along very well, we'll just recall that they recently had an election as well, and they have some consultation obligations to do, but there are no major impediments that have come up with Nunavut. And over the course of the past couple of weeks in particular, conversations with Ontario have certainly intensified and have been very positive. I couldn't give you an exact timeline, but I'm feeling quite optimistic about all 3 remaining jurisdictions.
What is the major sticking point with Ontario?
At this point, really, we're just having very, very good conversations. There's, continues to be many, issues that we are discussing, but I would say overall, I think we both have the same objective in mind, and so we're just getting into the details. Ontario obviously has a very robust early learning and childcare system in place. And so we are going through in great detail with them to make sure that we get the best deal for Ontario children and families.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to questions on the phone. I think we have time to take 4 questions on the phone. Alors, opérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 if you have a question. Appuyez sur étoile 1 si vous avez une question. Notre première question est de Cédric Thévenin de l'Acadie Nouvelle. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Question. Bonjour, je crois que c'est une question pour le gouvernement du Nouveau-Brunswick.
For New Brunswick.
Savoir quel est le plan pour que les enfants francophones puissent être sûrs d'avoir une place dans des garderies
to make sure francophone children will have spots in francophone daycares?
Et merci beaucoup pour la question.
Answer.
Et juste en commençant, juste encore répéter
Just to start,
la situation pour Minister Gould, son équipe, et aussi
I want
le travail du
to
ministre
thank
qui était
Minister
précédé,
Gould
Ministre
again.
Hussein aussi, qui a commencé le
and
travail
I
sur
want to
ce
thank
dossier.
Minister Hussein before her, who
Merci
started the
beaucoup
work
pour
on
ton
the
appui
file.
pour le Nouveau-Brunswick, pour les
Thank you for
enfants et
your
les familles de la
support
province.
for New Brunswick families.
En réponse directe, on a déjà en
In
Nouveau-Brunswick
answer
notre
to the
système
question,
d'éducation
in
de
New
petite
Brunswick,
enfance est
we
basé
already
sur les mêmes
have
critères que notre système d'éducation publique, qui
a
est le seul
daycare
système
system that
d'éducation
is
qui est
based
on the same system as public schools. It is the only education system that is defined in the Constitution as a dual system, which has both French and English. So we have a number of early learning centers that are fully francophone at this time. A few years ago, we had bilingual centers as well. But now we see that there's a francophone and an anglophone system, the same way
quelques minutes passées,
as things are for public schools.
Ça précise l'importance d'assurer un montant de centres d'éducation de la petite enfance pour les francophones et aussi pour assurer l'inclusion des autres groupes qui peut-être n'ont pas reçu le même niveau d'attention que nos communautés fondateurs ici dans la province. Alors, j'espère que ça répond aux questions et on va être heureux de partager les détails spécifiques dans l'accord avec tous qui sont intéressés. Merci.
So that's the big picture, and we'll be happy to provide details. Thank you. Follow-up?
Je voudrais aussi savoir comment le Nouveau-Brunswick a fait en sorte que les entreprises privées qui gèrent les garderies ne soient pas impactées négativement par cet accord.
The private enterprises that manage daycares are not negatively affected by this agreement.
Trudeau a mentionné que le Nouveau-Brunswick a eu un système différent des autres provinces. C'est vrai. On a un système qui est beaucoup plus avancé, premièrement. C'était en place avec les subventions du gouvernement, les réglementations, etc. pour une dizaine d'années maintenant. Et je souligne la contribution à l'ancien gouvernement Galland pour commencer ce système.
This has been the case for about 10 years, and I'd like to salute the Gallant government who started this.
Mais aujourd'hui,
on voit
qu'on a beaucoup de centres que oui, si on dit qu'ils ne sont pas les organisations non lucratives, clairement. Mais en même temps, s'il y a les gens qui écoutent un Nouveau-Brunswick qui connaissent que la majorité des centres ne sont pas gérés par les gens pour le profit. Alors, c'est lié vraiment aux entreprises sociales. Je pense que ça, c'est vraiment la définition plus appropriée. Et c'est ça que, quand tu vois dans l'accord, on mentionne, on utilise cette phrase, jusqu'à mon gouvernement fédéral, il commence à dire qu'on a besoin d'appuyer le secteur qui est un peu entre le secteur pleinement
So there's a need to support the sector that is somewhere in between the fully privatized sector and the government sector. I believe that New Brunswick daycares are a great example of a kind of a hybrid system where there are regulations on salaries, etc. It's not a private sector like retail, for example. It's really about social enterprise. We're going to push that for everyone. That'll protect the centers that already exist. They will have spots added, and it will also assist with providing spots in the not-for-profit sector. I think it was worth the time we invested to reach the deal. We now have an agreement which truly reflects the complexity and the diversity of the early education sector in our province. Next question.
Thank you. Notre prochaine question est de Pascal Vachon de TFO. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour. Ma question pour Mme Gould.
Question
M. Trudeau a laissé entendre tantôt qu'il y aurait certaines clauses linguistiques. Je voulais savoir, est-ce que dans toutes les ententes avec les provinces, est-ce que le pourcentage de la population, par exemple, francophone, est-ce que ça va être le même montant qui va être réservé proportionnellement au niveau du pourcentage? Comment ça va marcher?
Will the amount reflect the percentage, or how are things going to work on that front? Answer.
Excusez, merci pour la question.
Thanks for the question.
Comme M. Trudeau a annoncé,
as the Prime Minister
a dit, toutes les ententes ont des provisions pour assurer que les communautés en situation de
measures to ensure that minority language populations
ont accès aux services de garderie. C'est quelque chose qu'on travaille avec toutes les provinces et territoires.
This is something that we're working on in every province and territory because we recognize that it's important that people access daycare in their mother tongue. So this is fundamental in every one of our agreements. Un suivi?
Oui, en suivi, vous avez touché un peu en anglais là, que l'Ontario, les
conversations
s'intensifient.
Conversations are intensifying in Ontario. I want to know, can we expect a Christmas gift of an agreement with Ontario by Christmas? Or do you think it might be in January, February? When are you thinking? Answer. Great question. I can assure you that conversations are going well. They are intense. They are positive. I don't know exactly
exactly when
une annonce, mais
we'll have an announcement for
j'ai
you.
toujours plus de confiance que nous
But
marchons en cet
I
égard.
believe that we are
Mais je veux
going in the right
assurer
direction at
les
this
familles,
time.
les
I
enfants,
want
les
to assure
enseignants
families,
dans l'Ontario
children,
que
and educators in
c'est
Ontario
ma plus grande priorité
that this is
et
my biggest
d'assurer que
priority.
l'entente
And I want to make sure
que nous aurions avec
that the
Ontario soit
agreement
une bonne
that we
entente
will
pour
have
les
with
familles,
Ontario
pour les enfants
will be a
d'Ontario.
winning agreement for families and
Merci
children
beaucoup,
in
opérateur.
Ontario.
Prochaine question.
Next question.
Merci. Our next question is from Wyatt. So sorry. Our next question is from Prabjot Soal from Red FM. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
My question is for Minister Gould. Minister, if you've mentioned about the talks have intensified with Ontario, so in case the deal does not happen, does the federal government have a plan or an alternative to help Ontario parents with childcare costs?
So at this point, what I'll say is I really do feel optimistic about the conversations that are happening with Ontario. They are proceeding well. There's lots of information sharing happening. And so at this point, I feel confident that we will be able to reach an agreement that is good for parents and children in Ontario with the Government of Ontario. But those talks continue. I really do want to give those conversations, those negotiations, the space to proceed, and that's exactly what we're doing right now.
Follow-up?
No, thank you so much.
Okay, then we will
Thank
go to
you.
the last question on the phone.
So our last question is from Aidan Shamandi from iPolitics. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm sorry if this was already addressed in French, but the Prime Minister repeatedly said a 10-year timeline, whereas the other deals and the other ministers on the call have said 5 years. So I'm just wondering if you could clear up the discrepancy in the timelines for me.
Yeah, it is 5 years for $10 a day across all agreements, including here in New Brunswick.
Okay, thank you. That's my only question.
Okay, well, given there were no follow-ups, I think we can squeeze in one last question, operator. Thank you.
Certainly. So our last question is from Alex Villeneuve from Radio-Canada. À vous la parole, please go ahead.
Merci.
Question.
Pour M. Cardy, j'aimerais savoir ce qu'il a
For
dit des
Minister
services de
Cardy.
garde après les classes. Est-ce qu'ils sont touchés par
What
cette
about after
cette
school
annonce-là?
and before school care? Are they
Les
affected by
services
the
après les
announcement?
classes? Oui, ça c'est absolument un
Answer.
des éléments. C'est déjà les
Yes,
services qui
they
sont
are
offerts
covered.
par beaucoup de centres d'éducation de petite enfance
These
dans la
services are
province.
offered by many
Et
daycares
c'est
throughout the
l'intention
province.
de leur aider. Alors, c'est quand
And
on
we're
peut
going to be
renforcer le
helping them out
secteur,
too.
ça renforce tous les différents éléments.
So when
Alors,
we
les grands
strengthen the
centres petits,
sector,
les centres de la maison, et aussi
we
les services
strengthen
après
every
classe.
aspect. So home-based daycare,
Et
daycare
Madame
centers,
Gould,
and
en
after-school
français,
care.
j'ai un
Question
sur
for Minister
l'échéancier,
Gould.
parce que oui, Trudeau a dit 10 ans, puis ensuite on a entendu 5 ans. Donc, les garderies
I'd
à
just
10
like you to
par
clarify
jour
in
ou en
French.
moyenne au
We heard
Nouveau-Brunswick,
10 years
c'est
and
pour
also
combien
5
de
years
temps qu'on peut
during
s'attendre
this
à avoir ça?
conference. So
Oui, bien sûr.
what is the timeline?
Alors, l'entente
Answer.
avec Nouveau-Brunswick, comme
Yes,
toutes les
the agreement
ententes
with New
partout au
Brunswick,
pays, les
as with
buts
all
sont
provinces and
une
territories,
coût de frais de 50%
the idea
avant de décembre 2022
is to
et
reduce costs by 50% by
arriver
December
à une
2022
coût de $10
and to reach
par jour
a
pour
$10
pour
a
les
day
services de
cost
garderie
for
dans
daycare
les prochaines 5 années.
in the
Alors,
next
dans
5
l'année
years.
2025-2026.
So in the 2025-2026 year.
Excellent. Donc, c'est ce qui conclut
Thank
la
you.
conférence
This
de presse.
concludes the press conference.
Press conference. Merci à tout le monde pour votre participation. Merci, bonne journée.